So thank you all for coming. I just want to get started by asking you a little bit about yourself. So how many of you identify as developers? How many of you have transcended developers?
Still alive.
No, still doing it? Okay. How about open source developers? Commercial developers? Okay, so some of the same hands are going up. Great, okay, great. And competing sessions are also great, so we won't say anything bad about them. I don't even use Playwright or, what was the other one? Cypress. I use Test Cafe. I'm like weird. So there we go. A little bit about me. I'm weird. I've been in the Python ecosystem for a very long time. I started off in graduate school at Berkeley working on map.lib, got my commit rights there. So that's, again, the Python community. And then I became one of the leaders in IPython and the Jupyter world, for which a project has been rewarded by the ACM with Software System Award. I don't normally start off my talks with like, oh, look at me, I'm a big shot. Look at this big award I got. But this will be relevant, very relevant to the talk. Because the ACM is the Association for Computing Machinery, as you may know. It's the professional organization for computer scientists. It was founded in 1947, so 77 years ago. Okay, and so since most of the room raised their hands and said they're developers, I'm gonna get super nerdy because we're all among friends here and talk history and things like that. So the award is a glass trapezoid, so it doesn't actually film very well, right? You can kind of maybe see that this is like a reflection because, so anyway, but the books in the background are foreshadowing because you can kind of mentally place a chili emoji somewhere on here if you're into that because the spice must flow. Okay, oh, yeah. And then I guess the other things here is I forgot to start my own redundant recorder. Do that now. And then I did work in academia at UC Berkeley. That's where I stuck around basically to work on Jupyter. And then I worked at a couple of startups and a couple of finance firms. So that's kind of enough about me. Contributors to this talk, I want to thank some of my friends that helped me reason through some of these things, talking about them. In particular, Matt Turk spent a lot of time back and forth IMing ideas and what to say and how to say it. So this is the first attempt at capturing this sort of thing. But enough about them, let's talk about me again. So I was born in 1984, which makes me 40. And the same year, the Macintosh was introduced, right? You remember the big smashing the screen Big Brother commercial? So that was 1984. And that was also the year of the first hackers conference, which was just across the bay. And that happened because Stephen Levy wrote a book, Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. How many have read that book? Oh, it's such a good book. Oh, it's great. This is hackers before that word was associated with breaking into computers, because people weren't even breaking into computers. People were busy trying to build computers to begin with. At that conference, at that hacker conference, Richard Stallman first publicly, explicitly stated the idea that all software should be free, and makes it clear that free refers to freedom, not price. And by saying that software should be freely accessible to everyone. So it was the first time he did that publicly. Okay, and so what's interesting about that being 40 years ago is that if you go back 40 years in the other direction, so it's like my nose is where I was born, right, 1984, this year, and you go to, let's see, to your right. To your right. If we go in that direction, so to your left, this is where we are today, right? And on this side, there were no computers. Basically, 1944 is the first computer. Mark I was built. You know, if you were interested in computing vested functions, you had a computer for that. You didn't really have a generic computer yet. So this is all of computing history in the modern sense, right? This is, I'm not talking about just calculators, but computers, right? And so half of the time we've spent with this idea of free software and building it and sharing it, right? Explicitly, right? Somebody taking the time to do that explicitly. Okay, so the oldest programming language, right, that's still in use today, Fortran, was specified in 1954, and it took them another 3 years to build a compiler for it. COBOL was finished in 59, Lisp in 1960, so that's all back here, but what I'm concerned about is the future, because a tremendous amount of value has been unlocked from all of this creative tinkering that people are doing, trying to scratch their own itch. And previous talk mentioned the LAMP stack, right? Linux, okay, that's free software. Apache, yeah, that's free software. MySQL, MariaDB, whatever it was, that was free software too. If it's PHP in this world, it's Python where I'm from, all of that is free software. Linux kernel developer and maintainer Greg Crowe-Hartman said in a talk just about a month ago that Debian runs 70% of the world. So he talks to a lot of cloud vendors. He's paid by the Linux Foundation to work on Linux. And he says 70% of the world runs Debian, which is a non-commercial distribution, if you're not familiar. And 80%, or more than 80%, he estimates, run non-commercial distributions in general. So he says that Red Hat, SUSE, Ubuntu are great distros, but they're not what the world is using, right? And the concern is that this world that is being used right now is going to shrink and shrivel and down the vine. I don't know. Have I painted a dark enough picture? All right, so the challenges that I want to talk about today are the three up here. So we're going to talk about LLMs for code completion. And we're going to talk about mixing paid and volunteer labor and how inherently you can't get away from it. Like that's a struggle that will always be there, provided that you want to have hobbyists around. And then the last one is this relicensing of open source software that's been happening with a lot of venture-backed companies. Sort of, people have been referring to it as a rug pull of taking away a license that was previously like, oh, I can do anything with it, and now I can't. And what to do about that. So let me just start with that first one and say that GitHub Copilot and other large language models for code completion trained on publicly available software with no regard to licenses of that software acts as a license laundering cudgel that denigrates the work of open source developers who have contributed their code under a legal framework for how to use that code and how it can be used. If their code was contributed under a copyleft license like the GPL that Richard Stallman introduced a couple of years after that 1984 meeting, their expectation was that no user of their code would ever lose the ability to modify the software. If it was contributed under a permissive license, like the BSD or MIT licenses, the expectation was the inclusion of their code would result in an attribution to the project that they contributed to. Tools like GitHub Copilot make all of those expectations of the original authors null and void, enabling theft of their work, all in the name of making it easier for programmers. Okay, so I called this a pyramid scheme in the abstract, and here's what I mean. Normalizing plagiarism. It's also a heist. So this is a picture of the Louvre, if you're not familiar with, and it's on the scale of taking everything from the Louvre. That's what I think. Okay. Talk about value capture, right, from the previous talk. Okay, and for a pyramid scheme, you need two things, right? You need, okay, it's loosely defined as a pyramid scheme. It's just an effective metaphor, I think. You need the schemers want to corrupt other parties, right? You want to get more people into the game. Oh yeah, let's get them in there. And then you need somebody profiting at the top, right? Or sort of the higher up in the pyramid you are, the more profit you'll get. Okay, so these are the two things that I'll need to show, or that I will be end up showing, and hopefully it's self-evident, but let's roll with it anyway. So let's start with the base and work our way up. If enough people participate in plagiarism, we expand the world of plagiarists, we normalize it. I'm just repeating myself here. Let's take a look at how the corruption pyramid looks like at its base. Okay. Fundamentally, no one using the system is built in such a way that you are meant to not care where the code came from, and I think that matters. And I think we should care where the code came from. So GitHub does their little meeting, or big meeting, GitHub Universe, they call it, I think. I think it's this week or next week, across the way in San Francisco. And they every year release the state of open source as they see it. And in last year's survey, so this year's survey hasn't yet come out, but in last year's survey there was a nice little banner in the middle of it telling you that GitHub Copilot, don't fly solo, try it, it's free, first one's free. Okay? In the middle of their report, they say, speaking of generative AI, almost a third of open source projects use GitHub Copilot. Oh, that sounds like a lot. Although, at least 1 star, I can star my own projects, never mind. And then not 5 sentences later, they repeat the same claim. Open source maintainers are adopting generative AI. And then let's take a look here. Oh, this follows our program to offer GitHub Copilot free to open source maintainers. Okay, so, I mean, I know I'm a little conspiratorial here, but this is what this sounds like to me. Let me just make sure I haven't missed anything that I wanted to say here. Oh, right, so in 2023, there were 301 million total contributions to open source projects across GitHub. Wow, that's great. And commercially backed projects continue to attract most of the open source contributions. That's also interesting. So this is what it sounds like to me. Because you do like cookies. I like cookies too. I have coffee. I don't have a cookie right now. Wouldn't it be nice to have a cookie? I'd like a cookie. And so I'm not going to convince them, the makers of these tools, how to do it, but I think that there's a different way to live. So hopefully I've made the case for sort of the base of the pyramid, and the pyramid keeps wanting to perpetuate itself in the hype cycle that wishes to make the whole world feel that it's normal to steal other people's work without attribution. Okay, so where's the top of the pyramid? Somebody has to be profiting from this. Well, in the Q2 earnings report, I mean, you can read faster than I can, but basically the GitHub Copilot, as of July of this year, makes more money than all of the GitHub business did when Microsoft acquired it 6 years ago. So Microsoft acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion 6 years ago. Today, GitHub Copilot makes more money for GitHub than GitHub did back then. So, moreover, that's not all. If you license Copilot Business or Copilot Enterprise directly from GitHub, this document applies to you. The first one's okay, you get to keep your own code. That sounds great until you read the next one, which tells you that, oh, by the way, you're on the hook. If you're doing something wrong, if you're violating somebody's rights, that's on you, that's not on us. We're just making suggestions. Okay? I'm not stealing other people's work without giving them credit, just making a suggestion, right? So they got users' money so that the users themselves can potentially infringe others' rights and go on from there. Okay, so I think there's also a secondary pyramid scheme, one that might work out for those of us in the room that are already good at developing, but the case is that we have been for 40 years, writing lots of code. Most code is buggy, so we've got lots of work to do, right? It's job security in some way, right? For those of us that know how to code. And I would claim that these tools that make it easier to learn how to code, they make it easier for you to get fish. They don't teach you how to fish. Like you get the end product faster, and there's evidence for this. I don't have the citation handy, but there was a group, a study done with 3 groups of students to complete a programming project, and one of the groups got to use something like GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT. Another one did, so there's separately, it was ChatGPT. Then it was something more like Copilot where they weren't talking back and forth with getting code suggestions, but it was just inline code generation. And then the last group got to use a search engine and had to do it. So guess who completed the task fastest? ChatGPT, right? Guess who was unable to, or who was the worst at figuring out how to change that same code for a follow-up task? ChatGPT. So the search engine user group it took them the longest to finish their task, but they all understood what that code did, and they were able to change follow-up tasks. I should check how I'm doing on time. So, pretty good. All right. So in March, so the Communications of the ACM is a journal that gets published every month from the ACM. And in March of this year, they released a little video previewing the headline, the front cover, the cover article on measuring GitHub's Copilot's impact on productivity. And I was enraged, as I hopefully demonstrated earlier on. And I mean, I wrote a letter to the editor, the contents of which I read to you up front, and the subject of the line was measuring GitHub's integrity, or measuring GitHub's impact on the erosion of trust, erosion of professional ethics. We're sitting here, I'm supposed to be an ethical professional, and we're talking about productivity. I mean, listen, we're talking about productivity, not ethics, productivity. We're talking about productivity, not ethics that we go out there and project into the world. We're talking about productivity. So they posted this video, and I was fuming, and I decided I was going to do something about it. I was going to leave a comment on the video. And something happened. Not 2 minutes later, that comment was gone. And I was like, well, what's going on here? Okay, so clearly there was some glitch in the matrix. Let me repost again. I reposted again. And it was gone 2 minutes later. And I'm like, what's going on? Is the ACM really unable to handle any kind of criticism? And if you go to this link right now, you will not see you will see that there's 3 comments on the video, but you will not see that. I mean, we could do this afterwards in the interest of time. I'm just going to skip that part, but you'll see that there's 3 comments on the video, but you have to kind of click around in order to see them because I've been shadow banned. When I go as a logged in user, I see my comment posted on there, but none of the rest of the world gets to see it. So what's nefarious about this? Well, I made the classic now mistake of including as a large language model in my commentary. Because YouTube now is used to having bots writing answers to them, and you know how bots are. They always write, as a large language model, I can do this, but I can't do that. So I became a bot as far as YouTube is concerned. So I was censored by trying to talk about this problem. Okay. So how comfortable are we with licenses? In this, if I throw up this picture, are we good? We got BSD up at the top, that's a permissive license, right? We got GPL, a copyleft license that's in the middle. It can receive works from other permissive licenses or copyleft, but the produced work must remain GPL. So, some people call that the viral nature of GPL, other people call it the security of their users, right? So, and then, proprietary software is out there. There's a lot of it, and can only take these permissive licenses work, and you can't take GPL. Anything that takes GPL license work has to be GPL. And so, what is the most popular, successful GPL project? It's the Linux kernel. What license does it use? GPL v2. Which is the same license that Drupal uses. Okay, so Linux had its 91st birthday, 33rd birthday. that was
From the future.
Yeah. So, come with me if you want to live. Yes, thank you for that. I found out recently that the first couple of versions of Linux weren't GPL'd. Linux was GPL'd in 1992, so there was some interim where the license was just no commercial use. It was actually explicitly against commercial use. So the question is, did GitHub Copilot exclude GPL code from the training of the code assistant? I see some. I don't see any head nods, and I see some shaking heads. Okay, so I don't know, but the world is bigger than just GitHub, right? And so there's another project that it's called Big Code project, and luckily they did exclude GPL code from their training set. So, but it's not all good and gravy, right? So just from the spice and the flow, right? I'm not going to be nice to everyone or anyone, it seems like. Big Code is an open scientific collaboration, okay? It's supported by Hugging Face and ServiceNow Research. That's who funds them, and that's, I think, where the development comes from. And it trained this star coder. There's a lot of stars today, right? I guess we're going to the stars, maybe? We're all made of stars? I'm not sure. Stardust? Okay. Ziggy? No? Is this thing on?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the Stack v2 is a data set that has over 600 programming languages. That sounds impressive. It's 32 terabytes of code. Okay, and then they cite, because they're responsible, you see, they said that they're going to be responsible development. They're going to follow these principles from the software heritage statement on LLMs, which, amongst other things, says that they're here to democratize the software creation process. Okay, now, be wary of people that say democratize anything. Okay, some have already inferred by my last name come from the former Soviet Union, and you just beware. Okay, so let's take a look at the aggregate licenses in this data set. So the vast majority of the data set has no license on it whatsoever. Okay, and of the little pie, the quarter, less than a quarter of the rest of it, the majority of that is MIT. Okay? So they did do something right. They left out GPL up front. That's great. But what's wrong is that there are other conditions outside of the kind of work that the derivative works may be combined with that apply. Namely, that the licenses stipulate attribution from the original authors of the work. So the question is, are you in the stack? Is your code in the stack? They have an app for that. So you can go to this URL, and I didn't list the URL here. I just listed the URL for the opt-out. But at the end of there's going to be time at the end. We can just go click on that, and you're welcome to type in your username, but your GitHub username. The point is that I'm in the stack. 83 of my repositories are in the stack. And have they considered that not everyone's code was written on GitHub? Like, there's a bunch of code that predates GitHub. What happens to that code? And what the hell, man? Why is it that that the authors have to opt out. Why is opt-in the default? Like, if only there was some way that we as developers could indicate to other people how we want our code to be used. Oh, we do have this mechanism. It's called a license. Okay. We'll come back and check in on that at the end of the talk. So, I lost my... All right, so Gabe Newell is the main guy behind Steam, right? He's a former Microsoft executive that started Valve Software, and he runs it. And he had this statement, which is that if property rights are provisional, your value of property changes accordingly. And I think the value of our property has dropped precipitously when it is no longer even like good job tech world. You're managing to cannibalize your roots, basically, right? We gave this thing away for free. All we asked is, for most of us, we asked just to attribute us, right? And you managed to still pirate that. Cool. That's going to be a wonderful future to live in. Okay, and so this is, ignoring licenses, I argue, could be seen as a license to kill the community. Okay. Others might say, well, that's just like your opinion, man. Because some developers are embracing this, and Rob Landley is one of them. He was actually involved in the GPL lawsuits because he was the maintainer of BusyBox, which is like a standalone micro Linux distribution that lots of embedded systems use. And he was interested in getting code back from these vendors that were shipping products, routers and things like that, without providing the code. And he's like, I want to see the code. And he's seen the code, and he wanted nothing to do with it. He wanted them to stop doing the licensing wars, and they wouldn't. And so he decided to rewrite from scratch BusyBox, which he called Toybox. Using a BSD license, he actually created this zero-clause BSD license, so you don't even need the attribution part of it, so it's completely kind of like free-for-all. Just use it, don't sue me. And Toybox is now shipped in every Android device and continues to be used, and he continues to work on it. There's also commercial companies that are kind of routing around the GPL in a different way by just supporting projects like LLVM that aren't GPL'd and that allow them to do the things that they want to do. Okay? So a friend of mine also told me that I should include the Santa Cruz operation trial in here. These are quotes from Jonathan Corbett's article about it. So the 20 years of the SCO lawsuit being filed was just, I guess, 21 years ago today. But all of this is to say that kind of this is nothing new. There's always somebody knocking on our door, trying to destroy what we have. Okay, so what are the paths forward here? I think it's clear that we need to provide data sets that train only on attribution-free licenses like MIT Zero, like zero-clause BSD, or public domain. I already mentioned Toybox. SQLite is another example of a project that's public domain. Okay, we have these projects, just don't take everything. Okay, and so Gentoo Linux put forth a policy of not allowing any AI-generated code in their distribution in March. NetBSD Foundation followed suit in May. So there's hope on that front that we can continue to work in an ethical manner. And there's a lawsuit that was filed that I didn't know about, that my friend David told me about. So I don't know how this will turn out, but I'm glad somebody's doing this, because this isn't right. Okay, moving on. So oil and water, the effort and expectation differences of mixing paid and volunteer work. So popular collaboratively developed software can attract a mixture of monetarily compensated development as well as the hobbyist unpaid labor that nourished the software in its nascency. Business critical gift economies don't exist, but projects and their participants vary on a spectrum from those two opposite poles, and positions shift over time. Paradoxically, this tension can be both productive and detrimental at the same time, depending on the perspective of those involved. So let's make this a bit darker. You're used to me by now, your friends. So the paid workers, I'm going to call them as oil because, you know, oil is dirty, right? It's dark. Water's abundant, it's pristine and clean. Yeah, I'm a hippie, but and things are more complicated. But let's do a little story of Keith Packard. Keith Packard is one of the main developers of the X Windows system. If you've ever used Linux and or the BSDs and had a graphical user interface, you have Keith Packard to partially to thank for that. He's also behind font config and Cairo. So the story here is in 1988. There's a problem with a bunch of the Unix vendors. Linux doesn't exist yet, right? There's a problem that they have in that Sun Microsystems has kind of the only working graphical system that is worth anything. And so the rest of the vendors decide to get together and work in the open, so fund this effort that will allow them to leapfrog SunView and kind of capture the users. So this is the sort of the origin of the MIT license. It comes from this project, and I linked here the talk itself. But here's what Keith had to say: is that he would not answer email, or he would answer email from people that were paying him first, right? Makes sense. So even though it was developed out in the open, and you know, if I was able to type back then and had access to computer and could speak English and lots of things, but I could have sent him packages, but they would have just sat in his queue unanswered, right? So that's an early example, right? Predates Linux, early example of a success story of commercial entities working together, but even though the work was out in the open, not everyone could participate in it equally, and not just because they didn't have the time, but because the attention of those involved was focused on where the money was, what their job was. Okay, so I think this tension is always going to be there. So there's a spectrum of being paid or a volunteer, and you know you can think of yourself like students don't get paid. Grad students do get paid a little bit, as I can tell you.
Students pay.
Students pay. That's true. Students do pay. Yeah.
Don't get paid.
That's true. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I was thinking of like students, like a high school student, public school. But yeah, you're right. Like a college student does end up paying. Thank you for that. Yeah, good contribution. You can heckle me too. You guys. This is fine. We're all friends. This is a small crowd. Okay, so and it's so there's also on the spectrum of like, well, you can be paid, but you could be paid a lot more if you didn't do open source, for example. But if you want to do open source, maybe you're like part of your you know sliding on that scale of paid to volunteers is like, okay, I really care about this stuff, and I'd rather just make less money and continue to be able to do it. Like, yes, maximally it'd be great to make tons of money doing this stuff, but realistically, maybe I'm okay with just paying the bills while doing something that I care about. And so there's this different kinds of projects that get started, right? You can have academic projects, or you can have industry-led projects, like the story I started with in this section. And then there's another project that Matt Shirk told me about, which is the Prove Yourself project, right? Like you got to make a splash. Talking about the technology that insists on monopolizing your attention from the previous talk. You have projects that insist on, here's a cool thing, like it might not be useful, but it's cool, right? And so there's lots of projects out there that now we're used to is like, oh, you have to make a splash in order to make a contribution. Okay, but I argue that there are, other than just this volunteer paid axis, there's other axes. So some people care about the journey, right? So there's the self and society, right? Is it about me, or is it about what I'm taking out to the world? Some people are just care about intellectual curiosity, right? I just want to get something out there, and it happens to be doing it out in the open. Other people are like, no, I really want to make an impact in the world. Okay, then there's journey and destination. Do I care about the experience of what it feels like to be doing this thing, or where we end up in the product? Okay, do we care about egalitarianism, or do we care about hierarchy, right? Like, do we take marching orders, or are we all voting? Do we all have an equal voting share, right? What does that look like? Okay, are we going to stand for ideals, or are we going to get something done? How quickly we're going to do it, or does it not matter to us how quickly we do it because we care about what the thing is going to be and how it's going to get built? Do we like to have fun? Well, what kind of fun are we talking about? Is it okay to be silly, or do we prefer things to be serious and so that we can have efficiency again? Are we nice, or is it not about being nice? Right? OpenBSD and the Ninefront community are shining examples of this abrasive culture that nevertheless is able to stand up and get lots of things done. And I wish that people didn't take credit away from them when they assume that you have to be courteous, right? This is controversial, yes, but abrasive can be effective, okay? You don't have to be nice. It's a very American notion that everybody has to be nice. In other cultures, they're much more comfortable with being in open conflict, and it's productive that way. It can be productive that way. Okay, and so are we pushing or are we steering, right? Some people don't want to do the work. Some people don't care what kind of work they're doing. They just want to work out, right? And then emotional and intellectual. Is this work, or is this diversion from work? Right? And so I have this tweet from 2011 when I was working on Jupyter. When I was working on a grant for Jupyter. So I was being paid out of a grant, and there were lots of flyby contributors coming in, and they were donating code left and right. And I was like, great, if Pyramids had a commit log, they could have been built by volunteers. And you might be thinking, well, they were paid by slave labor. No, they weren't paid by slave labor. They were paid laborers, right? So it was established in the 1990s that they found the grave builders, the graves of the builders of the pyramids, and so they were well compensated for their work. So it's a nice notion that maybe pyramids could have been built by volunteers, and I still think maybe they could be. Right? It depends on what else is involved. It depends on the other axes and the project. Okay, so would you pitch in and help build the pyramids if you knew that others were being paid for the work? I think it depends. I don't think it's clear, because if I get to do the code stuff that I like to do and somebody's doing the project management stuff that I hate doing, yeah, that seems like a fair trade. If somebody else is organizing a conference, yeah, I can pitch in and give a talk, right? So it depends. That wasn't dig at this conference, this is a free conference. This is great, you guys are great. I'm just saying. Okay, so how do you balance this paid and volunteer work axis? Sometimes you might identify a great volunteer and you want to bring him into the fold, right? You want to compensate them for their work. How do the other volunteers feel about that? Right? When the money gets a little bit tighter, what happens when you kind of have to let them go? You kind of know that they were already great to begin with. Maybe they'll go away, or maybe they'll stick around, right? So it's a tough problem. Okay. I already mentioned Valve, this game company that I'm sure if you've done any PC gaming, you're well aware of who they are. But they're now supporting, as of just a couple of weeks ago, Arch Linux, a distribution that they use for their little Steam box. So Steam, what is it?
Steam Deck.
Steam Deck, yes. The nerds, the gamer nerds are helping me out. Thank you so much. Of which I'm one, but I'm just not a very eloquent one. Okay, and so then there's also a recent effort that's led by the folks at Sentry called the Open Source Pledge, which is asking companies to donate, or asking companies to pledge to donate at least $2,000 per one of their developers, internal developers, per year to open source. And so I have links here to Chad Whitaker's blog where he writes about this thing. He's been trying to advocate for this since 2017. Interestingly, the number of 2K hasn't changed, but anyway. Okay, so as I said, I think the tension is always there. I think the tension is there personally for me. The tension is there because Jupiter recently formed a 501c6 foundation, explicitly trying to seek more money from big companies. And I think this is a case of hobbyists being squeezed out. I was one of the people that voted against this. Now, I don't want to, bring my dirty Jupiter laundry over to you guys and dump it on you, but it's just an aside. Okay, so Matt also pointed out to me that given Copilot's voracious maw, it seems like it's harder to say what's a hobbyist project and what isn't, since the usage of hobbyist code in commercial products is basically unknowable. And so I might start off as a hobbyist, do something clever, get a job offer out of it. Okay, and then I get some financial support or a grant. Great. But innovation happens at the edge. Innovation happens with individual users. So this is Eric von Hippel's work. Carol is the one that pointed me to it. The stuff that I do on my computer is where the magic happens, right? The stuff that you all do on your computers is where the magic happens. It's not organizations that make that magic happen. Organizations provide the fuel to make that magic happen. Producers have to worry about the size of the market. When you did something cool, it's not enough. When you did something cool, it's cool enough for you, it might be interesting, but it might not be profitable, or it might not be worth pursuing as a commercial enterprise. So it can be lonely to tinker and do things by yourself, and no talk about open source would be complete without a slide about burnout. So recall that property of oil to hold more heat, right? So there's a lot of things that I put up with when I'm being compensated for it monetarily. I have to, there's a 4-letter word that comes to mind, and it's JIRA. So money can be a salve to things that we don't like doing, but you don't want to end up in a Dune world where just all the water evaporates. Okay, so try our one-size-fits-all miracle cure. So what is this? Math pop quiz. Anyone? No?
1/3 of the business salary is the velocity of the project.
1/3 of a
Business salary, no, I'm joking.
1/3 of a business salary. You're close. Okay, so I'll give you a hint. V is the size of the user base. H is the height of entitlement. V is the volume of output. So this is the formula for the rage curve.
The rage curve, yes. The rage curve.
It's a problem in open source. It's a challenge. All right, last thing we talked about. I've got a little bit of time. Good. So silver spoons lead to later forks. Pay the piper. Relicensing trends and commercially supported source projects. With increasing frequency, previously open source software projects backed by commercial entities are shifting away from traditional licenses. Recent examples include Sentry, Terraform, Redis, CockroachDB. Why are they doing that, and what are the affected users and developers doing in response? So why are they doing that? This is a shorter section. To make money. They fear hyperscalers. They've received insufficient return on investment from trying to foster contributors. What are we doing in response? Largely, we're forking. Note that the forks already happened when they changed their license. That was the original fork. They just happened to take the original name along with that fork. Okay? And here's where the talk from being, spicy turns into a bit of self-flagellation. Okay, philanthropy. This is how you should think of open source software. regardless of who is making it. Okay? So you can't be mad at a donor that you relied on for a long time that stops giving to your cause. I mean, you can get mad about anything. You can be Hulk, right? But you wouldn't begrudge a pastime top contributor from not being around anymore because they wish to spend their time elsewhere. You shouldn't begrudge a business that's choosing to spend its money elsewhere. Okay? We're all trying our best. I mean, not me, I'm not, but other people. Right? So fair source is an alternative to closed source. Again, this is a recent development, also from Chad Whitaker and the other folks at Century leading the charge here. I don't know if this will work out, but there's already 8 companies adopting it, and the idea is that it transitions to being a traditional open source license after some time, right? I don't know if it'll work out, but people are allowed to make decisions and make changes in how they live in the world. And it's not all bad. Because, for example, just recently, I think in August of this year, after 4 years of not being open source, Elasticsearch is back to being open source again. So sometimes they change their mind and they come back. And you can read about how it is that they did that. So then there's other disruptive changes. So left pad incident. The thing that doesn't get talked about left pad incident enough is it's been painted as like, oh, one developer got mad and decided to just screw everybody. And no, that's not what happened, okay? So NPM decided to side with one of their commercial users. Okay, Kik was a company, and they wanted this name that this developer, who happened to also develop LeftPad, had been using. And when they took away his Kik, when they kicked him out, no? Too much? Yeah, it's good? Okay, all right. Leave it in. Okay, and he says that this is not driven by logic. Sorry, it was driven by logic. It's not driven by logic.
No, not logic and good order.
Not logic, and it's an exclusive norm. Okay? Thank you for the laugh. Appreciate it. Okay, so he says that LeftPad was like a death and rebirth moment for me. The part of me passionate about open source was dead, and something new took over. Now I'm passionate about business, marketing, running companies, teams in different ways, as much as I am about programming. Okay, and then the other disruptive challenges are the ongoing WordPress saga. And, but let's remind ourselves of the rage pyramid. Rage still applies here because, previously I used the rage pyramid in defense of maintainers, and this time it's worth mentioning that, commercial developers are allowed to do what they want to do, right? The open source licenses allow them to do it, and we're allowed to fork. Okay, so we're almost home. The 3 things that I talked about is that I tried to give you the kinds of flavors that exist in the developing open source software today. The big alarm bell is this attribution theft. Then business cycles come and go, have their booms and busts, and there should always be tension between free and open source projects and their paid contributors inside of them. And finally, forking is a right. You have to adjust your expectations accordingly. Thank you for your time and attention.